Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. So now he'll explain some of the hadiths on the virtues that we saw so far. So the first thing that he mentions is regarding the hadith that as for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's saying that except for all the actions of the child of Adam are for them except for fasting, fasting is for me and it is I who reward for it. Right? What is this ascription? فَإِنَّهُ لِي, it is for me. Right? This ascription. Because is prayer for other than Allah? Prayer is like spiritual gymnastics, yani? No. What is this ascription? Because there's different types of idafa. Right? So he says that this ascription is an ascription of honoring. Right? Like when we say Baytullah, the house of Allah. Right? For the Kaaba, it's because of an honor, because of the honoring. Right? Because that idafa is not of mere ownership. Because every house belongs to Allah in that sense. It's not, there's many other types of ascription. Right? It's not the dwelling place of anyone. Right? Rather that idafa is of tashrif. And what's the honor of the fasting? Fasting is for me. Says because fasting is unique in that no showing off enters into it. لأنه لا يدخله رياء. Of course, one thing just to be careful of, if you're following in the Arabic PDF, never take i'rab from editions of Arabic books, even if they're from a reputable publisher and seems to be a sensible editor, right? Because, and we could go into a long story of why Arabic books are so badly published, but the basic lesson is there's no standards and no processes, pretty much. So anytime there's randomness, you should expect error. Right? لأنه لا يدخله رياء, right? Because no riya enters upon it. لخفائه, because it is hidden. In reality, fasting is not an action. Fasting is a unique spiritual work that fasting is not an action that you do. Fasting is refraining from action. And because you're not actually doing anything in the fast itself, there's nothing that you can show off with the fast itself. Because you're desisting. All showing off would be in other ways. So when it was very fashionable to be religious, and fasting was one of the more difficult expressions of religiosity, people who wanted to show off would make sure that their lips were dry, for example. But that's not the fast itself, it's something other than the fast. Because fasting itself has no action. Okay? And so this is that no showing off enters it, and also it is inherently sincere because it's a hidden action. You could just go away from people and drink and no one would find out. So both no showing off enters in it, and it is inherently sincere. Right? Because to remain fasting, it's not just a question of in front of people you don't eat or drink. Even when you're alone, what is preventing you from not eating or drinking or breaking your fast? That for Allah. Right? So that's one reason. And then he says, وَلِأَنَّ الْجُوعَ وَالْعَطَشِ, and also it's for Allah, is that this is something uniquely for Allah. Because people would do things for the sake of rulers. But historically, people didn't used to fast for their rulers. So if you're a king, or similarly for worldly gain in our time, someone's trying to get into politics, right? neither Trudeau nor Harper nor the NDP team could really care if you're fasting for them, right? Like, you do things to curry favor. No one would curry favor with kings or rulers by fasting. Like, why would they care? Because there's nothing in it for them. Okay? This also, fasting highlights the difference between things done for people and things done for Allah. Because Allah does not seek forms, He seeks meanings. And fasting is pure meaning. And similarly, idol worshippers didn't used to fast for their idols. Certainly in the Arabian Peninsula. They might sacrifice things for their idols, but they wouldn't fast for their idols. And that's at least true in the Arab Peninsula. Whether it was true elsewhere, this is a general statement, it's not an absolute. This is a wisdom, right, rather than a legal cause. As for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying, وَأَنَا أَجْزِي بِهِ, and it is I who reward it. The ulama have explained this at length. Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, for example, mentions that there's at least 20 different interpretations of this. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala conveys this meaning. It's a hadith Qudsi. These are divine words related to us by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is bursting with possibilities of meaning. What it means, I reward for it, even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who rewards for all acts of obedience. What it means, he says, is the tremendousness of His rewarding. And the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who's taken it upon Himself to bestow this reward. Whereas other rewards, the angels give the reward for it. Okay? But this is something that comes directly from Allah. And then, as for the Prophet ﷺ mentioning, وَالصِّيَامُ جُنَّةٌ, fasting is a shield. Right? What this means is, fasting is a protection, a protective barrier from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet ﷺ said, if you're fasting, avoid two matters. Al-rafath was-sakhab. And these are closely related. And as an interesting Arabic point, if a sin comes before a kha, generally you can substitute it for a sad as well. So the Arab, like, you can say sakhab or sakhab with a sad. Of course, with hadith you relate them as has come in transmission. Right? But there's reasons. Because of the heaviness of the kha, the sin before it would sound as a sad. So the Arabs could say it in both ways. But that's a separate matter. The rafath, foolishness, refers to disputation. Foolish conduct with others. Al-khisam. But Imam Nawawi explained that sakhab refers to jahl, acting foolishly. And the worst of acting foolishly is arguing with people. But then sakhab in that interpretation would be very close to rafath, would be disputation. He says sakhab means, so rafath is fahishul kalam, rafath is fahishul kalam, vile speech, which is either speech done out of anger, done disputatively, speech done in harmful ways, or sinful speech. So, rafath refers to either foul speech or more broadly, foul conduct, which is foolishness, jahl. And Imam Nawawi prefers a broader thing, so don't be foul in speech or conduct. And sakhab is disputation. to get into argument, particularly if it results in anger or is expressed by raising of voices, as other commentators explain. And then if someone tries to argue with you, then say, I am fasting. I'm a fasting person, I am fasting. And this is repeated twice for emphasis. Right? Now, do you actually say it? Do you actually say it? Number one. Number two, who do you say it to? Do you say it to the other person or do you say it to yourself? Because self-talk is a type of talking as well. Right? It's like in Blackadder, if any of you remember it from way back. One day, Blackadder was talking to himself, and his servant, Baldric, comes in, and he says, he told him, I see that you're talking to yourself. He said, yes, Baldric, that's the only way I can guarantee intelligent conversation. So self-talk is a type of talking as well. So the ulama differed. So let them say, I am fasting. The possibility is either say it to the other person or to say it to oneself. And then to say it in words, right? To say it in words or to affirm that meaning. Because the most expressive of words are actions. So there's four, logically, there would appear to be four possibilities. To say it to yourself, or to say it to the other person, which would be the obvious one, or to say it to yourself. To say it in word, or to say it in that which is expressed by the words. Right? So there's four possibilities. What does Al-Izz ibn Abd Salam, he says, he's saying, let them say, I am fasting means reminding oneself that one is fasting. To make clear the distinctiveness and difference of one's state. Because the person fasting is not like other people. You've committed yourself to hold yourself to what's pleasing to Allah. So remind yourself of that. So say it to yourself and let your actions express the fact that you're fasting. The distinctiveness, distinction and difference of fasting. So Al-Izz ibn Abd Salam, you see some of his scholarly style. He likes going to the meanings of things. But he can't because he is min ahl al-idrak lil-ma'ani. He's of the people who understood meaning. But Imam Nawawi, who's much closer to being a careful textualist, as he repeatedly reiterates, he says, if one does both, it is better. Right? If one reminds oneself and conducts oneself in accordance with the realization that one is fasting, but also one says it, I'm fasting. Because that serves to remind the other person. So really there's three sunnahs, where there's three things that can be. Remind yourself that you're fasting. Conduct yourself in a manner befitting the person fasting. And if you remind the other person, I'm fasting, so that way they're reminded and they may help you not to get into an argument, right? Wallahu alam. If one did both, it's better. As for his saying, the smell of the mouth of the person fasting is sweeter with Allah on the day of judgment than the smell of musk. Okay? He says that these words, this is a type of, one of the ways meanings are indicated in Arabic is what was called iqtida'un nas. That the text necessarily has something that is implicit. And what is implicit and unstated there is necessarily there as part of what is expressed by the text. Because without it, the text doesn't make sense. why would bad smell be pleasing to Allah? Smells are not of consequence to the creator of everything. Whether something smells good or bad is not of consequence. Nor is it, because in itself, good smell would be more pleasing to Allah than bad smell. But what is the cause of the bad smell there? Is the fact that the person is fasting. And what does it mean that it is pleasing to Allah? It is not the smell, but its expression in the hereafter by Allah rewarding for it. So he explains that there's something necessarily implicit in this text. Right? في كلامي حذف. حذف, something implicit, not that it's missing. Okay? And which تقديره should be understood, the reward of the smell of the person who's fasting is sweeter with Allah than the smell of musk. And it's the reward for the one whose breath is bad. Meaning for the fasting person. Despite this apparently displeasing thing, it is pleasing to Allah because of the intention behind it. It's not related to the bad smell. It would be from the sunnah. It's from the sunnah to brush one's teeth before fasting. It's from the sunnah by agreement to brush one's teeth while one's fasting, except that the Shafi'is generally said that one does not fast after, one does not brush one's teeth after midday. Generally. Though Imam Nawawi chose, it's an ikhtiyar of Imam Nawawi, that one still brushes one's teeth after midday. The Hanafis said that's not understood from this hadith of the bad smell is pleasing to Allah, because if the pleasingness to Allah is related to the badness of the smell, then it would be sunnah to eat garlics and onions and all kinds of things to aggravate the bad smell before the day, and then it would be sunnah not to brush one's teeth even the beginning of the day, because you want to stir up the bad smell. The relationship is not between bad smell and reward, but between what causes it, which is the sincerity of the intent of the one fasting is pleasing to Allah. Even if it has certain worldly appearances that may not be pleasing. And that is rewarded much more than something which is pleasing in this dunya, the smell of musk, whose application is rewarded. Right? It was the most pleasing of smells to the Prophet ﷺ was musk and oud, as we know from hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. But fasting is much greater than that, because it is more pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And others took this more literally, like Ibn Salah. The two joys, the fasting person has two joys. A joy when they break their fast and a joy at the meeting of their Lord. He explains, right? The joy is not that I'm eating now. Right? Because that joy is dangerous, because finally I can eat. It's as if you disliked to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's actually disliked. Right? Exasperation during the fast, at the fact that you're fasting, is disliked. So when will the fast be over? It's like, you're in a state of worship. Right? And if it's sincere for the sake of Allah, if you're being rewarded for, who would be annoyed at being rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And they say the same thing applies to the month, hoping that the month finishes. Because you're fed up with fasting, that's also makruh. So it's not, the joy is not at eating, he explains. It's due to Allah's granting them success, tawfiq, to complete an act of worship. مَنْ وَجَدَ خَيْرًا فَلْيَحْمَدِ اللَّهِ. Whoever finds good, let them praise Allah. So the joy is in بِفَضْلِ اللَّهِ وَبِرَحْمَتِهِ, and Allah's favor and mercy in facilitating for them to complete the fast. Which is why you say in gratitude, Allahumma laka sumt. Right? O Allah, it is for you that I fasted. وَبِكَ آمَنْتَ, and in you have I believed. وَعَلَى رِزْقِكَ أَفْطَرْتَ, and upon your provision do I break my fast. Right? And even that, when you say عَلَى رِزْقِكَ, and upon your provision, it's not the fact that, great, we have jalebi for iftar or whatever you're having for iftar, but it is that it is from Allah. Right? Right? And the other is in Allah's reward in the hereafter. It's in Allah's reward in the hereafter, in the manifestation of Allah's raising in rank, drawing close, bestowing closeness, etc. And then his saying in the hadith, they leave their desire and food for my sake. Right? What's the consequence of that? Right? He explains, is because the servant chose obedience to Allah, right? Obedience of their Lord above obedience of their own desires. Despite the strength of desires, the desire for food, for drink, for fulfillment of sexual desires, these are strong desires in the human being because the human being needs these matters for personal and collective preservation. So there's a wisdom why these desires have been made strong in the human being. Without them, the individual would die. Imagine you didn't feel the need to eat or drink at all. So you didn't eat or drink and you died. That'd be a bit of a problem. Right? And if people didn't feel any urge to procreate, humanity would not be preserved. Right? So, despite the strength, and there's great wisdom in that strength, right? And caprice, overwhelming most people, right? Allah rewards them by granting them the reward directly Himself, right? And there's a principle, he says, and it's a beautiful principle. وَمَنْ آثَرَ اللَّهَ آثَرَهُ اللَّهُ. Whoever chooses and prefers Allah, Allah chooses and prefers them. And whoever chooses and prefers Allah over anyone or anything else, Allah chooses and prefers them. Right? And this is clear from many hadiths. From them, the hadith Qudsi that's in the Sahih, أَنَا عِنْدَ ظَنِّ عَبْدِي بِي. I am as my servant thinks of me. Right? And they say from that, بِمَا دِنْتَ تُدَانْ. As you are, so shall you find. As you are with Allah, so shall you find from Allah. And then he mentions an important principle. فَإِنَّهُ يُنَزِّلُ الْعَبْدَ مِن نَفْسِهِ حَيْثُ أَنزَلَهُ اللَّهُ مِن نَفْسِهِ. Right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants the servant rank with respect to himself in accordance with the rank the servant gives Allah with respect to himself. Right? Where are you with Allah? To the extent that Allah is with you. So if Allah is the greatest of your concerns, then you will be the greatest of Allah's servants. But that concern has to be manifest in the choices one makes. That's true concern. It is the care that is manifest in the difficult choices one makes. So whoever chooses Allah chooses them. For He grants a servant the rank with himself that the servant gives Allah with respect to themselves. Right? So because of this, whoever inclines towards sin and leaves it out of fear for Allah, Allah tells the guarding angels to record it for them as a good deed. As we know from hadith. Right? So you incline toward to committing a sin, but you leave it out of fear of Allah, it is written as a good deed because you chose Allah over your own desires for His sake. And as for the specification of the gate of Rayyan, right, entering paradise for the gate of Rayyan, this is because they're granted the distinction of this gate to manifest the distinction of their worship and its honor. There are certain gates to paradise for the central acts of worship and virtue. The people who were distinguished by that act of worship were its people who gave it its due, either by fulfilling its obligations or doing it with excellence and consistency in accordance with the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants them that particular honor of tashrif. And we'll close by the explanation regarding the angels. Why do the angels pray for the one in whose presence other people eat? Right? It says because they're leaving food that's present in front of them. And despite their natural inclination towards it, because of their love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because they're seeking Allah's mercy, they're seeking Allah's good pleasure, they're seeking to hold themselves away from that which will be displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the angels recognize that good that is being expressed. It's not easy. Other people are eating and you're fasting. This would apply also to the nafil fast, right? And would appear to particularly apply in Muslim context to a nafil fast. So here, the angels pray for such a person, right? Because of how pleasing that holding oneself to restraining is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, what does the angels' salah refer to? Okay. He says, وَصَلَاتُهُمْ عِبَارَةٌ عَنْ دُعَائِهِمْ لَهُ بِالرَّحْمَةِ وَالْمَغْفِرَةِ. Salah, praying for them, right, refers to the angels asking, you're making dua for them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah grant them His mercy and His forgiveness. So they say, salah, Allah's blessing, so to speak, or Allah's praying for His servant is that Allah's granting them mercy and raising them in rank of closeness with Him. The praying, the salah of the angels for the believers is them asking Allah to grant mercy and forgiveness to the believers. As is understood from a number of the verses that talk about the angels as praying for the believers in the Quran, from which Ibn Abbas is the one who gave this interpretation. And the Prophet ﷺ referred to him as Turjumanul Quran. We'll stop here. In next session, we'll begin by looking at the role of the fast in expiating for sins and its restraining one's desires, which he covers briefly. And then he also mentions how it keeps one from sin. And these are practical benefits of fasting. Reducing one's sinful desires, how it helps one hold from sin. And he also mentions a number of supplementary benefits, such as fasting, if done according to Sunnah, gives clarity of thought, is good for one's health, right? And there's many other worldly benefits that are understood. So we look at those and then look at some of the central adab of fasting and what is avoided during the fast. So we'll stop here, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Any questions before we close? Go ahead. No, so would it be bad adab to say, I'm fasting? Well, it depends on how one says it. Okay? Adab is doing the right thing in the right way, with the right intention, given the context and circumstance. Okay? That's adab. Doing the right thing in the right way, with the right attitude, with the right intention, given the circumstance and considerations. So, So your grandfather, you know he's diabetic, and you know he's not very good at controlling his sugar intake. So you may not want to take the jalebi to him. Say, Nana Jan, would you like some jalebi? Because he's going to grab it, and then it's going to cause commotion in the family. So it wouldn't be good adab to start serving the jalebi to your grandfather. Because what is adab? It's to do the right thing, in the right way, with the right intention, given considerations and circumstances. So it depends. Right? And the ulama generally inclined that the underlying meaning is that remind yourself that you're fasting, and let your expressions express, let your actions express the qualities of one who is fasting. And if appropriate, tell the other person. But you'd only tell the other person, whoever believes in Allah and the last day, let them say the good or remain silent. You'd only say it to the other person if it's, what's saying the good? Saying that which is likely to be of benefit, as Imam Nawawi said. Right? So saying the good is saying that which is likely to be of benefit. So your boss is upset with you, so you say, I'm fasting. And say, I'm your boss. It may not be appropriate. May be foolish, could get you fired. So your boss is upset with you, say, stop, I'm fasting. Right? May not work. Wallahu a'lam.
What do you advise for us to do, given the point that you said it's makruh, to want the day to be over and to mention that, or to rejoice in the fast being over? How do we deal with that, given that a lot of people around, given the long days, do express that manifestly? So how do we deal with that with other people?
How does one remind other people not to be? Call to the way of your Lord with wisdom. And with good reminder. Right? That's the basis. Right? Right? So with wisdom is doing things that are likely to have a good consequence. Right? So you may want to share one way of, if someone says, I can't stand fasting, isn't it a long day? Okay? Right? So you validate the sound aspect of what they're expressing. But then and you don't say, why are you saying it? Why are you behaving this way? But you say, something I found beneficial is to remind myself of the great reward of fasting. So you're not saying, the Prophet ﷺ used to correct people indirectly, for example. And one way to do that is to validate. And they say that's one of the ways to deal if someone's backbiting you, for example. Is backbiting in your presence. So they say, Uncle Jamil, such a miser. Now if you go directly and say, don't call Uncle Jamil a miser, they say, it'll cause a bit of a fight. But rather if you validate the sound aspect of what they're saying, so say, yes, Uncle Jamil is careful with his money, but what I've found is that whenever someone needs help, he helps them. Right? And there's many, and then you've corrected the insult, but in a good way. That's adab. Right? In a good way. Right? When you can figure that out, you do so. Sometimes it's not possible. Right? Sometimes not possible. But then one can be firm, and one's best not to be harsh. Right? One can be firm. Something's wrong, it's wrong. But the difference then between firmness, right? So there's degrees. Right? There's some things that are overlooked. خُذِ الْعَفْوَ. Overlook. But others shouldn't be overlooked. So there, if you can deal with it gently, then you do it gently. And if gentleness is possible, then that's superior. But sometimes one should be firm, because gentleness won't work. So firmness is allowed, but going beyond firmness to harshness is not allowed. And there's characteristics of firmness, right? That you've considered the gentle route, it's done with restraint, right? In control of oneself, with the right intention. You've considered the consequence, that this is likely to be of beneficial consequence. The Prophet was sometimes firm, but he was never harsh. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى التحقق بأخلاقه صلى الله عليه وسلم وغفر لنا التقصير. So we'll stop there بإذن الله تعالى. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد نبي الرحمة وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما.